everybody. Bienvenue and Anine. So nice to have you all here with us on a snowy day in the Toronto area. My name is Hilary Inwood. I'm the coordinator of the Sustainability and Climate Action Network at a place called OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, and that's part of the University of Toronto. I'm here very much in partnership with my colleagues at the Toronto District School Board from the Sustainability Office and the Eco Schools program. I'd like to introduce you to Pam Miller, who is the instructional leader, counting her days now until retirement. We are also counting her days because we're going to be very sad when she goes. Also, Chris Metropolis and Jen Vetter are here from the Eco Schools program, and we're thrilled to have them in the room. Also like to introduce you to my colleague at OISE, and that's Sarah Urquhart, who's one of our amazing doctoral students, who is our webinar coordinator and does so much of the heavy lifting behind the scenes for all of this work. So really thrilled to welcome so many of you in the room today, and I think there's more coming in. And also to welcome Bella Lam, who is our keynote speaker for today. So Bella, just before we get underway, I'm going to just give a little overview of what's to be expected today. We're going to start with the land acknowledgement, as we normally do. I'll introduce you after that, and then we'll talk a little bit at the end about upcoming learning events. There's lots on offer right now, which is fantastic. So the land acknowledgement, I'd like to introduce you to the work of Abraham Angik Rubin, who has lived with his family on the land. He's an Inuit artist who has lived with his family on the land since the time that he was born. He worked with his family dealing with migration and the changing patterns of seasons before he was sent to residential school in the 50s. He grew up in what is now known as Northwest Territories. His quest to reconnect with his past found artistic form beginning in the early 70s. In this piece, which is called Shared Migration, it really does speak about the forced migration of his people, but also of, I think, increasing amounts of migration that's going to be caused around the world by the rising seas. Sedna is depicted here as a boat. Sedna is a very powerful sea goddess for the Inuit. And in this case, she's supporting people, animals, and spirits as the sea ice melts. And this sculpture signifies in many ways that we're all in the same boat when it comes to the climate crisis, and we need to address this together. So as this, I'm just going to use this as a sort of an artistic inspiration for the land acknowledgement from the Toronto District School Board. We acknowledge that we're hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So with that, I'm going to stop share, and I'd like to do a formal introduction to our guest speaker for today. We're really pleased to welcome Bella Lam from the Jane Goodall Institute as our keynote speaker for today's webinar. Bella's worked in the NGO sector in sustainable development and international cooperation for over 20 years, amplifying voices of local partners in Sub-Saharan, South Asia, and Latin America. She joined the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada in 2016, working with the programs team in community-centered conservation through the lens of gender and climate justice. In June 2022, Bella was appointed as the CEO of the Jane Goodall Institute to lead it in forging a strategic path to address the three crises we face in our world today: climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental inequity. Her background in sustainable development is centered on the understanding that all aspects of the ecosystem, people, wildlife, and environment are deeply interconnected. Bella is also Vice President of the Ontario Council of International Cooperation Board of Directors, which supports civil society organizations based in the province. She's a strong advocate of working in a multi-stakeholder environment and leveraging collaborative partnerships to scale up impact. She says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that's something that we all subscribe in. It actually informs the partnership or the collaboration we have between OISE and the TDSB. So Bella, welcome. We're really thrilled to have you here today, and we're looking forward to learning from you.
Thank you so much for that very warm introduction, Hilary, and thank you, Sarah, for organizing this. And Pam, I just want to give a shout out to Pam. So some of you, most of you probably don't know, Pam and I go way back. We knew each other from another lifetime. So when you announced that Pam's about to retire, I did not because it's like, kind of happy that she's retiring, but happy that, Pam, you get to have that, enjoy that phase in your life. So I'm sure it's well deserved. So I just want to give you a shout out.
Thanks, Bella. And you can see Tim's guitars. Our
Yes.
relationship is based on my partner, Tim, and you can see his guitars behind me.
You hear a lot more of that in your retirement, I'm sure. Well, great. Thank you so much, everybody. Just by way of a little personal sharing as well, I was saying to Hillary and Sarah and Pam know this already, that my own partner has been working with the Peel Board of Peel District School Board, has been an educator and a vice principal for many, many years for his entire career. And so I certainly have a very soft spot for educators. I know the work that all of you guys do in and out of the classroom in so many different support roles. So so my hope for this afternoon is just that we'll have a chance to share some lessons and some ideas and how we can all support each other. I think over the next 45 minutes, I will be just kind of give the lay of the land, spend a little bit of time just setting context about our organization and what we do. But for most of the session, I'm hoping that we'll actually be talking about ways that, hopefully some practical tools that as educators you can use to inspire students addressing some of these global issues on a local level, and maybe some Q&A time afterwards as well. Okay, so just to start us off, many of you, I assume, but I at the same time don't want to assume, know Dr. Jane Goodall. She is a world-renowned anthologist and a passionate advocate for environmental issues, and in fact, on a number of cross-cutting themes. Some of it was mentioned, in terms of what the Jane Goodall Institute does. So her work in conservation started in 1960 when she went to now what is known as Tanzania to study wild chimpanzees. And at the time, it's never been done before. So she truly was a pioneer. And one of the groundbreaking findings that she was able to make is that chimps use tools. So in the 60s, the conventional wisdom is that only humans know how to do that. So really, it was something that really shocked the scientific world. And there have been many other discoveries since. And the Gombe Research Center, which is where this photo was taken, it's very much still active today as an active research center. It's been operating for over 60 years, and it's actually the world's longest continuous running study of great apes in the world. In the 1970s, Dr. Goodall founded the Jane Goodall Institute, bearing her name, and the idea is to really carry out her mission and ensure that her legacy can continue to have global impact. So today we have about 30 chapters around the world, and the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada, where I'm working with, is part of that global network. So through Jane and also through the work of the Institute, we have really redefined conventional thinking about conservation. So it's not just about protecting endangered species or protecting a particular biosphere or habitat, but by really centering communities and the members as key actors. And we'll talk a little bit about that and how it might link up to how we look at conservation on the whole. Dr. Goodall was appointed as the UN Messenger of Peace since 2002. And since then, she's really used that platform to advocate and raise awareness for a more just and peaceful world, and making that link that insecurity poses a threat not only to people, but also to nature. Because wherever there's conflict or inequity, there's often a correlation in terms of negative impact that we see on the environment, including wildlife conservation. And of course, 2024 is a huge year for Dr. Goodall. She turns 90 this year. Quite remarkable. And because in many ways, I don't think she's slowed down. The rest of us just try to keep up with her. So our founder is very multifaceted, and she has evolved over the years, from working with local communities. She's a tree planting warrior and not afraid to get her hands dirty, roll up her sleeves. Here you see her planting trees with a local school group. She's also an inspirational speaker that can move hearts and minds of thousands in the audience that sold out lectures. And through all these years, I believe that the scientist in her, she often said that, she went to one particular conservation conference as a scientist and she left as an activist, right? But I really feel like that scientist in her never truly left, because her thirst for knowledge and her curiosity to learn, to keep learning, has never stopped. And I think that's a really powerful, inspirational message for our students. I'll switch gear now to talk a little bit about the Institute itself. So we bring our founders' legacy to life by inspiring hope through action. And what that means is we take the approach I mentioned earlier, that community-centered conservation approach, understanding that people most affected by climate change, by biodiversity loss, by environmental inequity, are also the same people that can help us address these crises. And looking at these three very big topics, they are all interconnected, which means that you cannot find a solution to one of them without also tackling the other two. And this holistic conservation approach that we take, it's looking at how animals, people, and environment are all part of the holistic planetary health. And it's also grounded on the indigenous perspectives, where nature and people can only thrive if they live in harmony, and that idea of all our relations that indigenous knowledge often talk about. And now I'm going to take a short pause and to get some of you to participate. Some of you may have used Mentimeter before. If those of you who haven't, it's a very easy online tool. You should see a question posed to you. If you're on the right code, what you should see on your screen is what words come to mind when you hear about climate change, biodiversity loss, and environmental inequity. Either what you think about these issues or what kind of emotion it emotes, what do you know about it, what comes to mind, what do you associate these three very big issues with, put in the words that you can think of. So yeah, on the screen, you're actually seeing some of the words coming forward. So yeah, please keep entering. I'll give it maybe another minute or so. And for those of you who know how word cloud works, the bigger words, a bigger font, it means like more people are using the same word. So it kind of emphasizes the words that they're seeing a lot of repeated usage. But it tries to but everything you type in should be captured in there. So yeah, like I'm seeing a lot of things that we often associate with climate change, biodiversity loss, environmental inequity, both positive and negative, so in terms of anxiety, fear, urgency, but also action, opportunity. Yeah, and then just some change, for better or for worse, I guess it could be, and also some things that maybe we can do, some feelings like confusion, frustration. That's great. Okay, so I think that it's a pretty good summary of state of the world, if you will, like how all of us are feeling these days. And I think that's important to keep in mind as well, that the students may also, regardless of their age, they do hear a lot of these issues either from the school, from their peers, from their parents, from the news, from social media, and so just kind of bearing that in mind is it's not one thing to everybody. It means a lot of different things, and so yeah, feel free to keep putting that in, but I'm gonna take the pause there on that word cloud. So thank you for putting in your thoughts. It give me an idea of some of the things that you're thinking of. And so while we think about that word cloud that we just all did, I also want to then take a moment to actually talk about then looking at all these issues, these three crises, and what actually the Jane Goodall Institute is doing about these three crises on the ground, and just share in next maybe 2-3 minutes a bit about the work that we do, and reflecting on some of the words that you've expressed about it and what we're actually doing about it. So for JGI, or the Jane Goodall Institute, JGI Canada, we actually work both overseas and here in Canada. And overseas, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, in a regions, I should say, we dub it called chimpscapes, landscapes. And what that means is these are ecologically sensitive and significant regions. And you can see there's kind of this belt right across the middle of Africa, where the landscape is suitable for chimpanzees' habitat and not great apes usually. And I listed the countries that we specifically are currently working in: Senegal, Republic of Congo, DRC, Uganda, and Tanzania. And in these countries is where we apply that community-centered conservation approach, where we looking at not only preserving and protecting habitat and species, but we're actually looking at the communities living in and around the same area, the same chimpscape, to work with them as partners in conservation and supporting them and hearing what their ideas are so that the solutions are being implemented within the local context. Because we're keeping in mind that it's the same communities that also need to benefit from whatever conservation activities we're trying to do, because their needs needs to be addressed as they are on the front line often, right? Facing the very crises that we're trying to deal with, be it climate change, be it trying to adapt to it or mitigate against it, the biodiversity loss and what it means for their own livelihoods, and the environmental inequity piece, of course, is that in terms of climate change, the amount of carbon emission, has been put into the atmosphere historically since Industrial Revolution. It's been mostly in what we call the global north, right? So Europe, North America, Australia, etc. And such a small percentage is being put on by countries that you see here on this slide, and yet they are facing actually the brunt of it. So that's some of the inequity piece in terms of the conversation, whether it be in a classroom when we're having these discussions or in COP28, why should wealthy countries, act, right? And that's a big piece that a lot of these countries are pushing back. It's that equity piece. And now I want to bring it a little closer to your home. We also work in Canada, as I mentioned. The Jane Goodall Institute supports a number of different programs here. We work with Indigenous partners, we work with schools, school boards, educators, youth, children, youth-led organizations, and really from coast to coast in terms of some of our programs. Our most probably well-known ones called Roots and Shoots, and some of the people here may have been part of Roots and Shoots, and you know that program well. The map that you see, the Google map that you see here, is a snapshot of our 2023 grants, the 2022-2023 fiscal year micro grants that we've given, and so you can see them little blue dots where different schools or different groups have participated in our Roots and Shoots program. And we support these, you giving a small micro grants, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. Just moving the slide. And, we've been talking, about Indigenous perspectives in terms of that holistic approach. In terms of JGI Canada and what Roots and Shoots is really grounded on, and, it's really one of Dr. Goodall's reasons for hope is the young people. So the beauty of Roots and Shoots is it's not a prescribed, these are the actions you must take. This is the issue that you should care about. It's really, we have 30 JGI chapters around the world, but probably over 50, 60 Roots and Shoots groups, from on all different continents. And each of them are doing, local actions, right? They're looking at what's in their own backyard that they care about and what these young people care about. And when JGI Canada looked at how we should implement Roots and Shoots here in our own country, within the context of, Canada, we feel like we cannot talk about biodiversity loss or environmental inequity or climate crisis without also looking at the relationships we have with Indigenous peoples. So the Indigenous perspective is something we've weaved into a lot of our programming in terms of how we select partners to, how we are being intentional about when we are partnering with different organizations. And we've been doing that by listening and learning from these partners in the Indigenous term of what they call ethical space, which is in a concept by an Indigenous scholar that recognizes that there are different knowledge systems. And And there's Western ways of knowing, and then there are indigenous ways of knowing, and both are equally valuable. And where we're operating, we should look at both of them. What, again, indigenous peoples call the two-eye seeing approach. So not just saying, a Western way of how we have it, let's say what's in a curriculum, or how we've always seen, dealing with issues like conservation or science, or, a number of these different, social science, etc., through traditional Western academic processes, but also valuing indigenous ways of knowing. And this is how we build trust and understanding that space where we're trying to act to protect biodiversity and the connection to lands and waters and nature has to be centered more than just a humanistic approach, but also looking at the ideas of our indigenous partners, ideas of all our relations, right? Looking at the holistic of, the natural world and how we're looking at species, not just a human perspective, but also the animal's perspective, the environmental perspective. Now, it's not always easy. Like all the terms I've been talking about, they're very complex, they're nuanced, and it's thinking of these global issues and linking it to, well, how do you do that in a classroom? Like, what does that mean for a student? And what does that mean for a grade 3 student versus what that means for a grade 12 student? And they all could vary. So I'm going to ask you to go to the Mentimeter again. I'm going to start another slide. And just to get some feedback from you. So if you give me a moment while I toggle my screen, I'm going to if you're at the same Mentimeter, you either have a pop-up to say a facilitator has changed slides, skip ahead. Here, we're asking you to do some ranking. So there's 7 different choices and answering the question, what do you think are some of the main challenges that your students face, or trying to get your students to be engaged in global issues in your classroom? And so, yeah, I'll give you a minute just to do that ranking or reordering your ranking based on your own personal experience with students. First choice being what you think is most relevant and important, the 7th choice being the least, and then ranking accordingly. No right or wrong answers, of course. It's just what you think, what you're feeling as the live results are coming in. So just so you know, for Mentimeter, what they do for the ranking, I believe, is they just take the average of, so what you're seeing on the screen there is the culmination of all who are currently on this Mentimeter participating. So that's why it shifts. Not that they're changing your choice, but they're looking at as a group, what are the top choices? And like I said, they're still, some of it may be still changing orders a bit as people, relook at their ranking. I'll give it maybe just 20 more seconds. What's coming clear is it is applicable. I think the 7th choice of that, there's no problems with engaging students on global issues has stayed pretty consistently at the bottom, with just some changes in between. Yeah, and kind of what I'm seeing, or what you're all seeing, is that, in terms of kids not feeling anxious, the climate anxiety is a very real thing. I think both adults and students feel it. And if you remember the word cloud, that, some of these anxious feelings are also showing up, as educators ourselves. Okay, great. So thanks for doing that. So what I'm hoping to do is, again, like, not to say, we've got the magic bullet and panacea to like solve all these particular challenges, but it's just helpful to see, what you're thinking are some of the main challenges. And when I share about some of the tools that we'll be talking about the next second half of the presentation, hopefully we can help to address some of the issues about the anxiousness, like having information overload, how to make it matter, like, and Hillary and I were talking about the COP28 a little bit as we're getting ready, and I feel that way too, because you're at these meetings where it's, what they're talking about is like so up there. It's at the 30,000 feet, and then you have to kind of go home to your kids and you're like, but what did we just accomplish? So some of these, making that global local solution, it's really, I think it's important. And I think what's more important is that there is no one way to do it. And, but I think it's just being aware, but that there are potential pathways, different things you can try. And definitely can look at, having resources in terms of one of the things that JGI can do is support. Okay, so I think I'm going to leave that there, but thank you so much. It's helpful to get a sense of, what your needs are. And I'll kind of go back to our slides. Well, the main program and the main tools or different parts of the tools of this program that I'm going to be talking about, it's roots and shoots. Like I said, some of you, I think are pretty familiar with it. I'm not sure if everybody is. That could be another poll, but I won't take that time. So it is one of our main programs that we run here at JGI Canada. It is something that if you've ever heard Dr. talk at any of her lectures, she always mentions it because it's one of her reasons of feeling like is hopeful for young people. There are 4 main steps. I mean, given the time, I won't go deep dive into each of the steps, but certainly we'll pull some of the particular tools and we'll point you to our website where there are a lot more resources. So as I said before, there aren't prescriptive of the actions themselves. What we're trying to provide a framework for is the process that you want to take, your students through the roots and shoots and what we call the 4 steps. And I'll just briefly talk about each of the 4 steps. Get inspired first, do your community mapping, take action, and celebrate results. So for the first step, getting the inspiration. So for us, for the Institute and some of the youth that we work with, Dr. Goodall's message is often inspiring. Her idea that every individual matters and every individual has a role to play. That's the local part. You can talk to the kids about, yes, these are big problems, but what are some actions you can take? And then we'll talk about that. Another ways to get inspired is there are lots of local heroes. There's their peers, like young people like Greta Thunberg, like Autumn Peltier. Like there's so many inspiring actors within Canada, maybe even within some local heroes that you could point to. And then hearing hopeful stories. I think, talking about the 24/7 news cycle, a lot of that news feed, whether it be, social media or otherwise, it's not always positive. In fact, it's mostly negative. And maybe it's a reflection on the state of the world, but sometimes kids can feel overwhelmed. So pulling out hopeful stories, like going to resources where they are sharing, the storytelling and good news, that's also a way to inspiring hope. And one of the ways is a tool that actually we launched in COP28. And this is called the Tapestry of Hope. And so, Sarah, I'm going to ask you if you can pop the URL in the chat. It's also a QR code, so you can also get on it that way. It's a tool that the Jane Goodall Institute has put together. And what I'm going to do is, in a second, I'm actually going to launch that tool myself. And I'm going to share the screen on it so you can see it. But you can, if you want to put it on your own device, you can also do that and, look at it yourself. Basically, it's a tool that we've worked with Esri and we've worked with, some technology to look at, kind of like around the world and capturing stories and actions from continent of Africa, from Asia, Australia. We have big blobs there. That's where we see a concentration, lots in Europe, and then lots in North America. This tool is developed by the US, so that's why if you see a lot of US stories. It's not that we don't have them in Canada, but we're slowly populating it. And so it's an interactive tool. Like, so if you look at it, so you can spin the globe, you can look everywhere, but you can also when you click onto it, you will actually see some of the stories that we've uploaded so far. And these are stories from schools, very similar to schools that, some of you are from. There you get the chapter is basically the country where it's from. So here is from JGI Canada, the year that was, the action took place, talking about just a very, very brief description of what the project is, how it affects maybe animals, people, environment, or all 3. And then there's places where you can learn more, and then sometimes there are pictures. So I can do that from, then not just in Canada, but I can do that, let's say, if I were to go to the DRC. Oh, sorry, this is Burundi. Let me see if I do have some for DRC. Okay, this is Tanzania. So Tanzania is like the origin of roots and shoots groups, right? So here again, you will see like pictures, same thing, similar, setup, different groups and what they've done. And so sometimes that could be inspirational when your kids are seeing other kids, doing projects and learning about them. Or if your class is thinking about doing one project, this is a beta version, so I'm sure there'll be improvements along the way. And I'll be talking about how you can actually add yourself to the map later. But it's, we're getting better at the filter to see, if I want to see these kind of projects. So I think sometimes seeing yourself or having the students see themselves as part of a bigger community, that helps with the anxiety part, but because you're actually having a common experience, but can also be inspirational. Like they can see themselves as inspiring others or, being inspired by these other actions. So that's sort of, I'm going to go back to the slide. And so just want to share that tool with you. And I'll come back to you in a little bit and talk a little bit more about that. So after in however ways you want to do it, after you've inspired your class to say, okay, yes, we're going to do something, we're excited about this. The second part is what we call community mapping. Again, this is one actually, I think probably from a pedagogy part is probably one of the most important step, because it's actually taking that inquiry base. It's actually developing kids, students' skills in, kind of analytical skills, critical thinking skills, observation, and really using basically hands-on approach to find out what the problem is or what an issue is. So community mapping, again, I'm happy to point you to our website afterwards to share the tools. There are different ways you can do it. And how you define community is entirely up to your class or your group. For younger grades, it may just be the classroom or the school. For older grades, it could go out maybe to the neighborhood right around the school or just around the school. And, for a secondary school, they could map the city or, anything they want. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. You can just use pen and paper. You can use Google Map. It's also a approach that we use for some of our programs in part of Africa programs. Here on the right, you see in those rural villages, they don't have, connection or, iPad. So they just use whatever's available. Resources they can find, on the ground, and they just mapping out what they see. So the idea is not the tool they use to map. The idea is really getting the group, the students, to sort of see their community in a different light, in a more intentional way. You're looking for things that are, where are the gaps? Like, am I seeing a problem here? Why is this working this way? Why is that not working that way? And it could be done individually, but I think as a classroom, that's actually helpful, because something that one group of students see and another group may not. And same in the community, right? So your community, oftentimes we use that for a lot of our gender equality work, where the men may be seeing their community in one way, but then the women say, well, but no, like that water source is really far from where we are. And, we are the ones who need to get water. Yeah, Pam, you have your hand up.
I just want to add to your comments about community mapping, because we've used it in a variety of different ways. So those of you who teach secondary, they did an Instagram on community mapping where they tagged things that were climate resilient and then things that were climate sensitive. And then they worked on, climate change where I live. What can we do to build resilience in our community based on the photos? From a grade 1 perspective, I've seen the community mapping done similar to what the picture is there, where they actually took sticks and stones and they mapped their schoolyard, obviously smaller to scale, on their yard using the sticks and stones, and then identified where animals were and where animals were not. So again, I saw a squirrel here, and it became a living map. And when we do our climate action grants through the city, we really encourage people to do the community mapping, because we want students to connect to where they live and make it relevant to them, rather than just, oh, let's just do waste or let's just do food. Like, what's actually happening in your school, your neighborhood, and those, if you could think about those concentric circles. So if I can't say enough how good this mapping tool is.
Thanks, Pam, for the additional, the contextualizing it. And I think another thing is to just you able to get the kids outside, right? So, and they're getting them to observe. Again, there are different like tools and, that worksheets that we have on our website, but you don't have to follow that. You can make your own. I think the big part of the mapping is at the mapping stage anyways, is it's really kind of your brainstorming, right? Like, so don't limit to say, oh, that's not important, or you should look at that instead. Just, let the students, whatever they observe. And then there'll be a chance when you actually come down to the next step, taking action, that I'll go to. It's, where you kind of fine tune and you filter, like, okay, so there are like so many things we can do. What's the most, most appropriate one, or the one that you can most feasible one. And then there's also different ways you can incorporate, like, I can think of a math curriculum where you're doing ranking, or you're doing voting and count, so the number of different ways. It's not just like for a science curriculum or a climate or, social science curriculum, but you can actually, use that for a number of different ways within your classroom. And so I'm conscious of time, so I want to move along. So in terms of the kind of actions, again, it's completely based on your map, right? Based on your map to identify, what kind of action is most appropriate. We've kind of, just to give it some framework again, just broadly categorize them in 4 groups. But again, they don't have to necessarily fit in those 4. What we find mostly from experience that they kind of fall into either educate. So they know about the issues. They want to raise awareness about the issue. So it could be writing a newsletter or making posters or bulletin boards, again, age appropriate. Restoring is where some of the really kind of hands-on, if they want to do a pollinating garden, or if they, see, maybe they living near the Credit River and they're seeing certain things about that. They want to do some, whatever actions around that, or planting trees. Motivate is an interesting one because it's really getting to kind of that inspiring others, right? So some of that, you're saying, okay, now they are excited, they get inspired, they see the issue, they want to get others and their peers or their parents, or whoever else, their relatives. And sometimes it could be a challenge, or it could be a campaign. We at JGI globally, we have like a global campaign which is run in all the chapters around the world, like No Waste November. So the kids can design their own campaign to motivate others to take action. And advocate, we don't see that as much, but I think actually, especially for the older grades, it is a really important tool. And it's almost like your civics duty, right? So kind of understanding who are the decision makers, because part of the community mapping that I didn't go into too many details is not just observing with your eyes, but who can you go ask, right? Like, is that maybe the local librarian? You can ask them something. Maybe you can go ask the city councilor some information. So there are people that you can ask to get information. So part of the advocacy is learning who are the decision makers, right? So again, at the municipal level, it could be the councilor, it could be, the local MPs, and, it could be right to the MP to say, hey, we have this question. And, or start petitions like change.org. So there are a number of other tools you can do for that. I'll just tell because it sticks in my mind. I just want to share this one quick story from Winnipeg. So the schools, it's an elementary school. They're in kind of a low socioeconomic neighborhood, so the kids in the community mapping, what they notice is, it seems to be really unsafe, in terms of the area near their schools, right? There's like empty needles, or there are, just a lot of things that they're seeing that they feel like, it's both from environmental health as well as their own personal safety. So they collected all this information and they brought it to the mayor to present, right? And then asking the mayor to say, what are you doing about it, right? And one of the kids actually asked, well, so Ms. Mayor, I want to know, when your kids go to school, do they see these things, right? So, and you see the mayor kind of squirmed a bit, and so actually afterwards, that elected officials asked the teacher, say, like, did you prime the kids with these questions, right? And they're like, no, these came from the kids. So I think even though advocate, I would say, is probably like maybe the tougher one for kids to get around. Like, I think sometimes we need to, give kids more credit because they actually can come up with some pretty amazing ideas themselves. So the next part, which is the action part, which I think the part that, in terms of how do you get the kids engaged? How do you deal with anxiety? Well, so sometimes I think when you feel helpless, when you're not doing anything, that anxiety and what kids are feeling could spiral. But if the kids can feel like, however small, or, or if they, big or small, if they feel like they actually doing something about it, sometimes that can help with making them feel less anxious, right? By redirecting their energy on something tangible that they can do. So again, I'm just putting some questions out there on this slide just to get you thinking about, how to plan out your project. What are some of the questions to ask? Like who's this impacting? What is your potential solution? What do you need, to actually do that? So it could be materials, it could be time, it could be help with teacher. And so we are able to give some, small funding if there's actually a funding need, like I need to buy more materials, or maybe we need to learn more about this, or need a speaker, or you want to do a field trip to, do X, Y, Z. So there are different resources you can access. But the last step I just want to talk about, which I think is really important, is how will you know if you're successful? And that part kind of goes into our fourth step, which is kind of celebrating results. Because sometimes I think teaching kids with that skill set as well. So start with the end in mind. What is the change that you want to see? So you're building a pollinating garden. So just to say, we built a pollinating garden. Okay, that's good. But it's like, but so what? Like, what are you trying to observe? Did the kids see that, there used to be more bees and butterflies, and now there are less, so by building a pollinating garden, are they measuring that, right? Do they have a baseline? And it could be as sophisticated or as simple, right? As qualitative as kids observe that there are more butterflies after the garden, and so forth, right? Or you can do some quantitative indicators, is like if you want, sticking with the garden idea, you want to increase the number of kids involved. So you're actually tracking the number of kids that are spending time in the garden or looking after the garden. So various ways, regardless of how big or small the change, I think it's really important to know on the outset how you're going to measure it, what are you looking for, and then teaching the kids about that. So that, again, it goes back to that reinforcement of, they've done something, they've seen a change, and it helps them keep them motivated and in dealing with that, feeling helplessness, and also dealing with that, and then through your other curriculum tie, you can talk about, why pollinating garden, it's important in biodiversity loss, right? So taking these really big concepts, but then bring it down to there are specific, actions that kids can take. And so I'm just going to quickly talk about the APE Fund, which is Animal, People, Environment. That's the acronym for APE Fund. So I mentioned a few times, and again, some of you have accessed it already, I'm sure, that the Jane Goodall Institute give out these micro grants between $800 to $1,000 usually per project. And the cycle usually is it runs annually, and we try to do it with the school calendar. So November in the fall. So this year's the application is closed, but there's always next year. So kind of November 1st is usually when we open up the call for applications. It's all on the website. There's a form you fill out. We try and make it as not very taxing, knowing how much is on teachers' plates. Once we get all the applications on our website, and I'll point you to it, and I can share everything with Hillary and Sarah after, and Pam to get you the URL. Once you submit it, we have a process of evaluating them, and just I'm not sure if everyone knows this, but we've in the last few years have actually gotten our Youth Advisory Council to also evaluate them, so that we're bringing the youth voice in, also making decisions on the kind of things we should fund or the kind of things we should look for. Typically, we tell the schools or youth groups or Indigenous-led partners, depending on who's submitting, whether they're successful in January. And then basically from February on to June, your winter, spring time is when you implement the project. So it's important to keep that in mind too, especially if it's a project that requires, you go using the garden, so that it's going to be kind of like April, May that you're doing it. So you do all your planning. And then in June is where you write a report. Again, it's a template. We ask you to fill out. We try and make it as simple as possible, just a few key questions. But that report is not just to report to us, but like what I said before about sharing that information back with the students, right? To actually say, hey, this is what happened. This is what mattered. These are the changes, to sort of reinforce that part about that they can make a difference. So there's a lot more information on our website about the APE Fund, and I encourage everyone who is interested to apply, and or B, ask me about it, or ask Pam and Sarah and Hillary. I'm sure they all can share more information. Now I want to kind of bring it back to this map, I don't think I need to go back to the URL necessarily. Basically on the map, and actually maybe I will. Sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing just so you can sort of see where it comes from. As I mentioned before, there is a way for you to actually add your stories. So let's say once your school have done a project, it could be an 8 fund or not. You could just, you don't necessarily need to get funding from us. If you click on this, add yourself to the map. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. You have to put in your birthday because they have to make sure that you are at least 18 for consent, etc. So I'm just going to, let me see if they let me do it here. Just quickly, I'm going to do it. See, so if you put in a date that's too young, they won't let you. You see that. So you put in your name, your project's name, describe your solution and your action. And if you've done an 8 fund, you can just copy paste because we ask similar questions. Like if you've done like those applications, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Here you can add, if you don't want to put in an exact address of your school, you can just put in the city. This is just where the pin will drop on the globe, so they know where it is. You can be very sophisticated and get into longitude attitude because it's powered by Esri, so it's powered by GIS technology. We do encourage adding photos. I do want to emphasize that for any photos that you upload, again, I'm speaking to the converted, like I'm sure you're gonna have photo consent with your students. And more recently, we've just been actually using photos that don't see close up of any kid's face, or it's a side profile at their back, or more just landscape to, just to make sure we protect privacy, and you acknowledge. And then there's an opt-in option. There's not much more to the form. So you go through it, and what happens is then it, actually right now, we have a colleague in US just doing reviewing the applications and making sure there's nothing untoward. And then it'll be uploaded. It may be a bit of a time lag. So you actually will, potentially your kids can see your project on that globe that other kids can see. And so I think that part it's exciting. We're testing it. Like I say, it's a beta version. We're seeing, how it would work. And right now it's only in English. So unfortunately, we don't have the French. I mean, you could you could put your information in French. But in terms of just like other countries and other languages, the English, unfortunately, still the default. Like I said, we don't right now have the next version, which we're hoping to incorporate some of those things.
And Bella, I'm just going to say we're at 5:02, and I've just encouraged people to pop some questions into the chat if that's okay for you. Because we're just about at the end of our time together. Thank you. We actually we're on it. We put the link to the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada into the chat earlier, and I had explained in the chat too that we'll put together a resource list. Thanks to Felicia for doing that for us today, who's also from Boise. So I just want to see, one of my questions for you was around what I have never been to one of the COPs, and I'm interested in what that process was like as a member of an NGO, and whether you think that's a useful process for people to still be going to at this point.
No, $1 million. So I've been to 2 different types of COPs. So some of you may know that the poor cousin of the COPs, the biodiversity COP, COP 15, was held in Montreal in 2022. So JGI Canada, because it was here, we were able to essentially youth delegation. So that COP, slightly smaller, the biodiversity versus the climate COP, we were actually able to sit in a lot of the negotiations as observers, as NGO observers, which I found really helpful because you kind of see how the sausage is made, so to speak. You kind of see why are there so many contentious issues on that language? And then you see the dialogue between the different parties, by parties meaning member states. So that's interesting. I found the COP in Dubai less so. There were a lot more just you have to be official member, like party status, like official state members to be part of the negotiating rooms. And as an NGO observer, like there are a lot of different there are parallel sessions you can attend, the plenaries you can attend. So you do get information, but not to the same level. So what I found is helpful is to be at the table so that holding decision makers accountable. I was actually pleasantly surprised, given it was in UAE, and the restrictions typically for security, because they were, just in terms of quite strict about a lot of things, that there was a space for civil society, for peaceful like protests and for voicing their demands and their concerns, like pushing for end of fossil fuel. The language, as for those who follow COP, it did make it into the final wording at the end to phase out our fossil fuel. There wasn't as hard deadlines as I think a lot of organizations hoped, as civil society hoped, but it's taken them 28 COPs to get the actual words fossil fuel into the body of the text. So I feel like it's important because actually one Indigenous leader said it really well. And she said, I've been to so many of these and people keep asking me, such as like, why are they still going? Why is it still there? And she said, because they haven't done what we've asked them to do. This is why I'm still here, and I thought that was really important. And I think it's just making it, you have the public sector, private sector, and civil society, right? So the COP, the UN multilateral system is really for the public sector and member states. There were a lot of business interests in our cost, particularly this COP. And so I think representing that third arm, that third leg of a stool, the civil society, to make sure that representing the voices, of all the communities that are affected, like to show up, I think it's important.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's just, I think we're all frustrated with the slow pace of the work at the COPs for sure. But you're right. There's a lot of parties with a lot of different, needs and expectations and assumptions that are there negotiating together. So there's no doubt that there's lots of heavy lifting going on. We just hope the heavy lifting is going to result in going in the right direction, going up.
Absolutely.
Pam, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, and I know you've addressed this before, Bella, but you're one of the few organizations I've seen that really focus on connecting with the community. And so I did put a page from a document on dismantling racism, who talks about the importance of connecting with community and not rushing ahead to action before we've engaged the people we're impacting. But yet, Jane Goodall is a white woman, and so am I. How is Jane Goodall overcoming, or the institution overcoming, some of that visual barrier?
Absolutely. I think one of the things is, it's not to say that there isn't a role if you're white passing, such as a Dr. Jane Goodall herself, but I think it's understanding, I'm not speaking for Jane, of course. She has very strong views of local communities, that's what she's always believed in. But if I look at the Institute, which is I represent, your positioning, it's really important. Understanding as, for example, we work with Indigenous partners. As a non-Indigenous organization, what is our position? How can we be ally? But before even being ally, how do we do no harm, or strive to do no harm? Are we taking up space where actually the Indigenous partners should be the one taking up the space? So I think being aware of that, being aware of our privilege and our position, and it's relative, right? It's relative privilege and position. So it was really interesting because we ran a project with, I don't know we're out of time, but I'll very quickly say, it's working with Indigenous youth to send them for an internship in Uganda. So these are Indigenous youth that are, facing many barriers and marginalization here in Canada. But when they were in Uganda, they were seen as the Swahili word Mzungu, which is just foreigner or white people. Like when I'm in Uganda, they call me white person because I'm just like not them, right? Like I'm not from it. So that was a really interesting dynamics that we had to work through with the youth, because they was like, what do you mean I'm privileged? And so that relative positionality, always understanding where that is how we don't have the answer, but we are learning about in every situation, how do we show up so that we are understanding and respecting, where we and we definitely do not act on behalf of any community.
Yeah, thanks.
No
Thank you
problem.
so much, Bella, for your time today and for sharing your expertise and all of the amazing good work that is happening at the Jane Goodall Institute of Canada. So, really, on behalf of all of us, please accept our gratitude for the
Thank
work you
you.
do and also for sharing that with us today. I've just popped up one more slide really quickly to end today's webinar. There's lots coming down the pipe. The TDSB has partnered with a project that I'm helping to co-lead called the Accelerating Climate Change Education and Teacher Education Project that's going across Canada. So these webinars are now being made available across the country for anybody who wants to join. Thank you to the generosity of the TDSB Sustainability Office for that. We're also working in partnership with a number of other groups. So you'll see lots of webinars going on. The ones I'm sharing with you up on the screen, the emerging principles and pedagogies of sustainability teaching, while it's intended for higher education, anybody is welcome to join. And I think there'll be words of wisdom from my colleagues at U of T as part of that for even teachers, teachers at all levels for you to join us for. So please consider joining us for that webinar. There'll be one on climate action grants. And Bella, is really interesting to listen a little bit more to the grants that you're offering, the micro grants at $800 to $1,000. Those aren't really micro; those are actually pretty good sized grants for schools. So there's many programs that are offering these kinds of grants these days, including a special one that's offered between the TDSB and the City of Toronto. So we'll be reporting on some of those results from what's happening when that money goes to schools, what's happening with that money. So we'll be hearing a little bit more about that. The exact date we're just trying to nail down, and we'll have that ready for you a little bit later. School board action plans, how are school boards contributing to sustainability, will be another one in March. And then we'll have in late March one on preparing for Earth Day. So there's lots coming down the pipe. You can join the TDSB's Eco Schools newsletter to get all of the updates, or you can hop on Sarah, if you want to just pop the SCAN webpage for events. There's lots going on, and we welcome you to join any of these. And we really appreciate you joining us today for this one. So Bella, thank you again. And thanks to everybody for joining us. And we'll send you out the list of resources and a link to the recording in about a week.
Thank you. And bye, everyone.